Lex Luger was a total monster of a man built like a Greek god. The WWE dumped millions into making him the next Hulk Hogan, only to have his championship dreams crushed at SummerSlam 1993. But trust me, that blown spot was just the tip of the iceberg in Luger's insane life story. How did the total package go from top of the world to paralyzed in a hotel room sitting next to his dead girlfriend with his reputation destroyed? It all started back in 1958 when Lawrence Wendell Fole was born in Buffalo, New York. Before the world knew him as Lex Luger, he was just a college kid watching his NFL dreams fall apart. He started out at Penn State showing a ton of potential on the field. But things got messy when he transferred to the University of Miami. The Hurricanes were supposed to be his golden ticket to the pros. Instead, one bad night changed everything. After a rough game, Lawrence totally lost it, trashing a hotel room in a fit of rage that got him kicked off the team instantly. That meltdown was the first sign of a temper that would become a double-edged sword for his entire career. Even with that baggage, the guy was just too physically gifted to ignore. Standing 6'4" with a body carved out of granite, massive shoulders, tiny waist, shredded abs, and arms that could probably bend steel, he managed to hang around pro football for a bit. He had cups of coffee with NFL teams like the Miami Dolphins and Green Bay Packers, but he spent most of his time riding the bench. He had a slightly better run in the USFL with the Memphis Showboats and Tampa Bay, but let's be real, football just wasn't in the cards for him. He was stuck in career limbo down in Tampa when fate finally stepped in. Wrestling legends Hiro Matsuda and Barry Windham saw him pumping iron at a local gym. Football couldn't use his raw power, but wrestling. That was the perfect playground for a guy built like him. Promoters have always drooled over guys with that superhero look, and Lawrence fit the bill perfectly. They told him he had the million-dollar look and asked if he'd ever thought about getting in the ring. For a washed-up football player running out of options, it was a question that changed everything. That offer was a total lifeline. He agreed to train under Matsuda, having zero clue what he was actually signing up for. Matsuda wasn't your average coach. The guy was legendary for his torture chamber training methods. We're talking about the man who broke Hulk Hogan's leg on day one just to see if the kid really wanted it. Surviving Matsuda's dungeon was a badge of honor. The training was absolute hell. Hours of agonizing submission holds, endless cardio, and taking bumps on rock-hard mats hundreds of times a day. Most guys would have tapped out, but that same stubborn streak that got Lawrence in trouble before became his superpower. He ate the pain, learned the ropes, and came out the other side a machine. Real quick, hit that like button if you respect the hustle it takes to make it in this business. By 1985, Lawrence was gone and Lex Luger was born. Championship Wrestling from Florida was where he cut his teeth, wrestling his first matches and figuring out his character. He took the name Lex Luger from the comic book villain Lex Luthor, which was perfect since he looked like a natural-born bad guy. But what really turned heads was how fast he picked it up. Most crossover athletes look clumsy for years, but Luger moved like he was born between the ropes.
He had that rare mix of power, surprising speed, and raw charisma that makes promoters see dollar signs. Legendary promoter Eddie Graham saw a gold mine in Luger. He strapped a rocket to the kid's back, pushing him up the card against big-time names immediately. Within months, he was hanging with the vets. By 1987, just 2 years in, Luger pulled off something totally unheard of for a rookie. He beat Nikita Koloff to capture the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship. That was the second biggest prize in the NWA. For a guy with barely 2 years of experience, that's like a rookie quarterback winning the Super Bowl MVP. That win proved Luger wasn't just a body guy. He was a legitimate force, a star who could put butts in seats and headline shows. He went from a football washout to a wrestling sensation in less than 3 years. But while he was holding that U.S. title, his career was about to explode. The most legendary faction in the game came knocking. The Four Horsemen, led by the nature boy Ric Flair himself, had their eyes on the big man. This was wrestling royalty, the VIP table that almost nobody gets invited to. In the Jim Crockett Promotions landscape of 1987, the Horsemen were the gold standard. Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Tully Blanchard were technical wizards in the ring and party animals outside of it. They didn't need flash or gimmicks. They were just the best. So why did they take a chance on Luger? With only 2 years under his belt, he wasn't exactly the polished technician the group was known for. But what he lacked in skills, he made up for with pure size and star power. It was like adding a sledgehammer to a kit of surgical tools. These elegant wrestling masters recruited a powerhouse who relied on brute strength. Ric Flair later said Luger brought a raw power they didn't have before, completing their arsenal. It created a really cool dynamic in the group. You had Flair, Anderson, and Blanchard bringing the precision, while Luger brought the intimidation. He was the muscle, the enforcer, who added a whole new flavor to the mix. And for Luger, the payoff was huge. Overnight, he went from a rookie to a top guy. And the education he got behind the scenes, you can't put a price on that. He watched masters at work every single night. The car rides between towns turned into master classes on psychology, timing, and the business. Those lessons put his career on the fast track in a way he never could have managed on his own. His swagger leveled up with every bell ring, and his work between the ropes got a lot more sophisticated. He started picking up the tricks of the trade from his veteran partners. We're talking about the nuances, perfect timing, using his face to sell the drama, and knowing exactly when to flex his power and when to make the other guy look like a killer. Just rubbing shoulders with that crew skyrocketed Luger's stock in the industry. Carrying the Horseman badge meant headline billing against the best in the business. His TV exposure went through the roof, and he was front and center on every poster. But the real golden ticket was the endorsement from Ric Flair. Being co-signed by the undisputed world champion of that era gave Luger instant legitimacy. When the crowd saw him standing shoulder to shoulder with those icons, they bought into the hype immediately. But in the wrestling business, success is usually a recipe for drama. As Luger got cozy in his spot and the fans started popping for him, the locker room vibe shifted. Remember, this faction was Flair's baby. Flair was the alpha, the world heavyweight champion, the ticket-selling machine. But suddenly, Luger's Greek god physique and sharpening skills were stealing the spotlight, and the female demographic was starting to cheer a little louder for the newcomer. What used to be mentorship turned into a rivalry real quick. You couldn't miss Luger's growing ego. He was done playing second fiddle to Flair. He wanted to be the main attraction. Sure, the United States Championship looked good around his waist, but everyone knew the hierarchy. Flair's world title was the only prize that really mattered. It begged the question, was Luger cool with being the lieutenant, or was he plotting a takeover for the throne? Promoters smelled the money in that friction and started laying the groundwork for one of the biggest angles the NWA ever produced. The Brotherhood started cracking right in front of our eyes. Little miscommunications turned into obvious beef on live television. Flair's flashy lifestyle and top dog status meant he hogged the glory, and that didn't sit right with a guy as confident as Luger. It all blew up in 1988 inside a steel cage. The Horsemen turned on their own brother in a beatdown that went down in history. That single moment flipped the script, turning Luger from a hated villain to a massive fan favorite as the guy brave enough to stand up to the bullies. He wasn't just Flair's muscle anymore. He was a bona fide main eventer with a built-in war against the dirtiest faction in the game. Please hit that like button if you think this was the golden era of wrestling, or drop a comment if you were Team Flair or Team Luger. The fans were fully behind him, but nobody saw the weird turn his career was about to take. Even though he had the total package, the look, the size, the crowd, his legacy became defined by a bizarre curse. He somehow managed to choke every time the big belt was within reach. As 1988 turned into 1989, Luger was the #1 threat to Ric Flair's reign. The feud set arenas on fire, pitting the physical freak of nature against the crafty nature boy. Every night, Luger would manhandle Flair, tossing him like a rag doll and locking in the torture rack while the crowd went absolutely bananas, pounding on the guardrails waiting for the submission. But then, the same old script would play out. A ref bump, a distraction, or a cheap shot out of nowhere. Flair would snake his way out with the title, leaving thousands of people stunned in silence. Fans were constantly heartbroken. One guy famously screamed that it was finally over after a match where Luger clearly had him beat, only for the ref to miss the count completely. Behind the scenes, the WCW booking committee decided Luger was worth more as the Eternal Hunter. They wanted him to look like a monster threat who just couldn't quite cross the finish line. It kept the box office booming and kept the belt on Flair, but it started to damage Luger's reputation. Luger was reportedly furious about being the perpetual runner-up, having heated talks with management while the fans kept paying to see a chase that never ended. At first, the audience bought it. The hunt is usually more thrilling than the catch, right? But after watching him fumble the bag over and over, the crowd started getting cynical. You could hear them saying, "Here comes the screw job." The momentum would build, and the fans would just brace themselves for the disappointment. It became known as the Luger Paradox, a superstar with all the tools who couldn't close the deal when the gold was on the line. When he finally snagged the WCW World title in 1991, it felt hollow. Flair had already left for the competition. He didn't beat the man, he just filled a vacancy. People literally held up signs asking, "Where's Flair?" during his victory lap. The reign was lukewarm at best and only lasted a few months before they moved the belt again. The company never went all in on him, treating him like a placeholder champion instead of the face of the franchise. It reinforced the idea that despite looking like a Greek statue, Luger just wasn't championship material. It was fascinating to watch. How does a guy who looks that perfect fail so consistently? He could hoard the secondary titles, but the big one was his kryptonite. It created a glass ceiling he could bump his head against but never smash through. Critics started branding him a choke artist, claiming he lacked that special it factor that separates the good workers from the legends. That reputation got set in stone during the infamous Lex Express tour in the WWF. After months of hype for a title shot against Yokozuna at SummerSlam 1993, Luger won by countout. The WWF bizarrely threw a massive party with balloons and confetti for a guy who technically lost the match because the title didn't change hands. Confused fans watched red, white, and blue streamers fall from the ceiling, which just made Luger look even more like a guy who couldn't win the big one. It was a pattern that repeated itself so much it became impossible to ignore, leaving a legacy that still haunts him today. He was a physical marvel who looked unbeatable, but simply couldn't close the deal when the chips were down. It is the ultimate cautionary tale in the wrestling business. Looking like a champion doesn't automatically make you one. By early 1992, Lex Luger found himself standing at a major career crossroads. Even with that million-dollar physique and multiple championship runs in WCW, he could sense it. He had hit a hard glass ceiling. The endless cycle of getting close but not quite winning the big one had left him totally frustrated. With the backstage drama heating up in WCW and his career momentum stalling out, Luger made the call that would fundamentally change his identity. He jumped ship to Vince McMahon's WWF, but that transition came with a heavy price tag. Luger signed off on a brutal non-compete clause that completely sidelined him from the ring during what should have been the prime years of his life. This move was more than just swapping company logos. It was a desperate gamble to jumpstart a career that had been stagnating for years. McMahon had a plan to use Luger's insane build in his World Bodybuilding Federation while waiting out the wrestling ban. But life had other ideas. A horrific motorcycle accident in June of 1992 derailed that temporary fix, leaving Luger injured and aimless, just as the WBF itself collapsed. When Luger finally popped up on WWF television in early 1993, the transformation was absolute whiplash. The straightforward powerhouse had vanished. In his place was a man utterly consumed by his own reflection. After waiting a year and dropping millions to get him, the WWF's grand vision was to turn Luger into the living embodiment of vanity. His entrance wasn't just a walk to the ring. It evolved into theatrical self-worship. Full-length mirrors lined the entrance ramp like shrines to his ego. Luger would stop at every single one, performing a ritual of self-adoration, flexing and admiring himself. He would make exaggerated expressions of pure pleasure, turning a simple ring walk into a spectacle of total self-obsession. Every mirror became a stage where he performed, not for the crowd, but for himself. This elaborate character was the complete opposite of his WCW persona. The total package had morphed into the total narcissist, shifting the focus from dominating the ring to superficial appearances. Even his entrance music featured the sound of shattering glass, broken mirrors symbolizing the destruction of his old self and the birth of this new, vain creation. The WWF threw him in the ring with technical wizards like Mr. Perfect and Bret Hart. While the matches showed he could play the bad guy, the crowd's reaction remained lukewarm at best. Despite the solid work inside the ropes, something crucial was missing. The connection between Luger and the fans just wasn't there. That disconnect was weird, especially given the cash the company had poured into him. But you have to remember, the WWF was navigating some rough waters back then. Hulk Hogan's departure left a massive star power vacuum, and a steroid scandal was rocking the foundation of the entire business. Luger, despite his credentials, seemed caught in the crossfire of this transitional era. Behind the scenes, the company was struggling to redefine its identity. The steroid scandal put Luger's physique-obsessed character in an awkward spot. He was simultaneously their biggest asset and a potential liability. The shifting landscape of pro wrestling was working against the very gimmick they built for him. After just 6 months, the WWF scrapped the narcissist character entirely. The mirrors disappeared, the self-admiration routine vanished, and they started planning yet another complete reinvention. That quick pivot proved the company knew they had failed. Despite all the planning and investment, Luger's character just hadn't clicked with the audience. But hitting the delete button wasn't the end for Luger in the WWF. It was just setting the stage for his craziest makeover yet, one that would push him to the top of the company in ways nobody saw coming. The transformation of Lex Luger from a preening narcissist to an all-American hero didn't happen gradually. It happened on a single pivotal day that would change his career trajectory forever. On July 4th, 1993, thousands of fans gathered on the USS Intrepid in New York Harbor witnessed something unprecedented. It was the manufacturing of patriotism in real time. The scene was choreographed down to the second. WWF champion Yokozuna, portrayed as a villainous foreign threat, had issued an open challenge to any American athlete brave enough to try and body slam his 500-pound frame. After a bunch of celebrities and athletes failed, Luger arrived via helicopter like an action star. The crowd roared as he stepped onto the deck in his Stars and Stripes t-shirt. Moments later, he did the impossible, hoisting Yokozuna's massive frame and slamming him to the mat as the fans erupted in patriotic fervor. In that split second, the narcissistic villain was erased from existence. In his place stood America's new wrestling hero, custom-built to fill the patriotic void left by Hulk Hogan. The transformation was instant, complete, and entirely manufactured. What followed was the most expensive hype train for a single wrestler in the company's history. The WWF unveiled the Lex Express, a red, white, and blue tour bus plastered with Luger's face that would carry him across America on a crusade for freedom. This wasn't just a wrestling angle, it was a full-blown marketing blitz attempting to create an instant American icon. Please hit that like button if you think this marketing stunt was genius or crazy, so we can keep bringing you these deep dives. The schedule absolutely crushed Luger physically and mentally. For 6 straight weeks, he endured marathon days, traveling upwards of 16 hours between cities, shopping malls, media outlets, and tourist attractions. The bus stopped everywhere. Autograph sessions blended into radio interviews, which melted into promotional appearances. The campaign tested his endurance more severely than any match ever could. But a strange disconnect started to emerge during this massive tour. Luger barely wrestled at all. While being positioned as the company's next top guy, he participated in remarkably few matches. His last actual match before SummerSlam was against Bret Hart on July 10th, followed only by a practice bout with Yokozuna on August 23rd. He had become a wrestling superstar who wasn't actually wrestling. The WWF's approach showed their desperation to recreate the Hulk Hogan formula that had propelled them to mainstream success in the 80s. Luger now entered arenas to patriotic anthems, wore American flag-themed gear, and posed with the same red and yellow color scheme that had been Hogan's trademark. The directive was crystal clear: accept this new patriot as the successor to Hulk Hogan. As SummerSlam 1993 rolled around, the hype train was off the rails. The big question was whether this massive gamble would actually pay dividends. The WWF framed this night as Luger's grand coronation. This was supposed to be the moment their all-American savior crushed the foreign menace and seized the industry's top prize. But then, a baffling creative choice completely torpedoed Luger's career in the Federation. After all the marketing, the money, and the manufactured hype, Luger beat Yokozuna. But he did it via countout. Yeah, he technically won the match, but he failed the mission. What followed was even more confusing. Even though the belt didn't change hands, they dropped balloons and confetti like he had just won the Super Bowl. Vince McMahon was on commentary screaming about a victory, creating this bizarre disconnect between reality and the narrative they were trying to force-feed the audience. McMahon is yelling about how Luger conquered the giant, while everyone at home is scratching their heads. If you think this was the most confusing booking decision of the 90s, hit that like button so he can get some recognition for surviving it. Luger got his big moment, but it was a championship celebration without the actual championship. Rumor has it they went with a countout finish to keep the feud going, but honestly, the damage was done instantly. You can't spend that much cash on promotion and deliver such a weak payoff. It created a trust issue with the fans that Luger could never shake. Wrestling fans are willing to play along, but they know a bad story when they see one. You don't drop millions of dollars and tour the country just to end it on a technicality with no title change. It was a celebration of mediocrity that killed the Lex Express dead. But while the janitors were sweeping up that confetti, a revolution was starting behind the curtain. As the memory of that failed push faded, the industry quietly started gearing up for battle. Here is the irony. The guy who couldn't deliver for the WWF was about to deliver the biggest sucker punch in the history of the Monday Night Wars. A cameo lasting less than 2 minutes would flip the script, turning Lex Luger from a flop into a game changer. Fast forward to 1995, and Luger's stock had crashed. The same company that gave him a custom bus now had him stuck in the tag division with the British Bulldog. Gone were the fireworks and the title shots. He was just another guy on the card, filling time. With his contract ticking down, Luger pulled a move nobody saw coming. He started talking to WCW while still working for Vince. On September 3rd, 1995, he worked a standard house show in New York, teaming with Bulldog against the Heavenly Bodies. Just a standard night at the office, nothing to write home about. Luger took his pay and disappeared. He left 0 clues about the bombshell he was about to drop. Then, everything changed. The very next night, September 4th, 1995, Ted Turner launched Monday Nitro to go head-to-head with Raw. They were live from the Mall of America. Halfway through the show, the crowd went dead silent before losing their absolute minds. People literally jumped out of their seats. No teasers, no dirt sheet rumors, no non-compete clause. It was a Grandmaster chess move that shattered the unwritten rules of the business. Drop a comment if you want to see a deep dive into the legal chaos this caused. This wasn't just a transfer. This was a declaration of war. The shockwaves were instant. If a top WWF name could show up on the competition's TV instantly, nobody was safe. The message was loud and clear. WCW was ready to play dirty. This was the opening salvo of the Monday Night Wars, and for Luger, it resurrected his career. Overnight, he went from a has-been to the hottest topic in wrestling. WCW wasted no time pushing him to the top, pairing him up with his buddy Sting. That alliance became the backbone of the show during a critical time. When the New World Order storyline kicked off in 1996 with Hogan's heel turn, Luger found himself in a really interesting spot. While everyone else was picking sides, Luger played the gray area. The WCW loyalists didn't fully trust him, but he was still out there fighting off the NWO invasion. It kept the fans on their toes and added some much-needed depth to a character that used to be pretty one-note. The peak of this run hit on August 4th, 1997, in Daytona Beach. On Nitro, Luger pulled off the impossible. He locked Hollywood Hogan in the torture rack and made him tap out for the World Heavyweight Championship. The roof blew off the place. For one glorious moment, the total package was on top of the mountain. But in classic Luger fashion, it didn't last. Just 13 days later at Road Wild, he dropped the strap back to Hogan. It was yet another sign that he just couldn't hold on to the momentum when it counted most. That stretch from 95 to 97 was really his last hurrah as a true main eventer. He stuck around as a key player, but he slowly slid down the card as WCW's booking went completely off the rails. We all saw his career fading on TV, but the cameras missed the real collapse happening in his personal life. When WCW closed its doors in 2001, Luger lost the structure that kept him grounded. Within 2 years, a massive tragedy would shake the wrestling world to its core. For nearly 20 years, Lex Luger relied on the adrenaline and routine of the business to survive. The deafening screams of the arena, the rush of the match, and the bond with the boys in the back. That was his entire existence. When Ted Turner's Wrestling Kingdom went under, Lex Luger ran into a wall tougher than any opponent he'd ever faced. Suddenly, he had no map. He later confessed that the ring was the only world he understood. Once the spotlight faded, he felt like he completely ceased to exist. Drifting in that void, his rock became Elizabeth Hewlett, the woman fans adored as the lovely Miss Elizabeth. Their bond started back in WCW, where she managed talent and worked on camera. After she split from Randy Savage, their work connection turned into a romance, as they both tried to figure out life after the big leagues. But the stress piled up fast. Trying to keep that superhero look without a major contract pushed Luger toward the pills. Elizabeth was having a rough time adjusting too. Luger wrote in his book that they were basically two drowning souls dragging each other down. The relationship turned toxic in a flash. Then came April 19, 2003. Cops swarmed their townhouse in Marietta, Georgia, and the scene was ugly. Elizabeth was beaten up, and Luger, the guy everyone called a hero, was in handcuffs for battery. The man who stood toe-to-toe with Hulk Hogan was now fighting demons way scarier than anyone in the locker room. Only 3 days after that domestic incident, Luger smashed into another car while driving through Cobb County. Officers found him behind the wheel with a suspended license and a gun in the car. Getting arrested twice in 1 week showed a guy completely spiraling. But the real nightmare hit on May 1st, 2003. Emergency crews rushed to their place in Marietta after a frantic 911 call. They found Elizabeth unresponsive. Despite rushing her to the hospital, she didn't make it. She was only 42 years old. The entire industry was paralyzed by the news. Miss Elizabeth was the queen of the ring, a trailblazer who brought class to the sport in the 1980s and 90s. Her saga with Randy Savage was legendary, and now she was gone in the worst way possible. Diamond Dallas Page later said he couldn't wrap his head around it, calling Elizabeth absolute royalty in the business. Losing her like that was just unthinkable. And when investigators tossed the house, they found the dark truth. Stacks of steroids, growth hormones, and painkillers everywhere. The toxicology report confirmed she died from a lethal cocktail of pills and booze. The law came down hard on Luger immediately. Prosecutors slapped him with multiple felonies for drug possession. The muscles that made him a global star were now just evidence of his addiction. Add in the assault and weapon charges, and his reputation was destroyed. With the evidence piled high, Luger pled guilty. The judge gave him probation, fines, and ordered mandatory drug testing. The court might have been lenient, but the court of public opinion destroyed him. In a flash, the total package became the industry's biggest warning sign. Luger admitted he hit absolute rock bottom, losing his career, his partner, and his good name all at once. If you're finding this story gripping, please smash that like button so more people can see the truth behind the glory. This tragedy peeled back the curtain on the business's ugly side. For years, the machine pushed guys to look superhuman, while their bodies broke down. Managing pain turned into full-blown addiction. And once the cheering stopped, a lot of these guys didn't know how to function in the real world. Luger's crash was even louder because of how high he had climbed. We aren't talking about a mid-carder here. This was a guy who sold out arenas nationwide and main evented against the icons of the sport. Going from a magazine cover model to a convicted felon showed the brutal cost of that wrestling lifestyle. It's a life defined by physical power. But what happens when your body just gives out on you? For Lex Luger, the guy they marketed as physical perfection, the answer was coming, and it was going to be brutal. Most people thought the story ended with the jail time and Elizabeth's passing, but fate had one more cruel surprise in the chamber. His issues kept piling up. In 2005, he got busted for violating probation by leaving the US for a wrestling gig. The guy just couldn't stay clean. His decision-making was as broken as his public image. Then, on October 19th, 2007, everything shifted. A giant suddenly brought to his knees. Luger was on a plane when he felt something weird. Seconds later, the man who slammed the 500-pound Yokozuna couldn't move a muscle. He suffered a spinal stroke. It turned one of the most physically impressive specimens on Earth into someone who couldn't even feed himself. It was a devastating hit for a man whose whole ego was wrapped up in his strength. Doctors gave him the grim news. There was no guarantee he'd ever walk again. For a month, he was stuck in a bed, a prisoner in his own skin. The mental toll was heavier than any weight he'd ever lifted. The former champ was fighting a war inside his own head now. He later explained that when you're paralyzed, you have way too much time to think. In that silence, facing his own end, things started to change. Every tiny win in rehab, wiggling a finger, lifting an arm, took a marathon effort from a guy who used to throw people around for a living. By June 2008, after months of hellish therapy, Luger pulled off the impossible. He stood up with help and started shuffling with a walker. It was slow, but steady. By 2010, he was walking better and even driving, though he never fully healed. His body, once a 275-pound statue of muscle, shrank down to a normal size as his lifestyle changed. But as the muscles faded away, something inside him finally started to tough up. In the middle of that nightmare scenario, Luger found something way bigger than any gold belt. The guy who used to think his net worth was tied to his biceps finally figured out what actually matters. Turning to faith gave him a reason to get out of bed that had nothing to do with bench pressing. He's been pretty open about how that shift finally helped him figure out who he really was. He realized he'd spent decades just being a physical specimen, completely missing the point of actual living. It was a massive ego check. Going from the strongest guy in the room to relying on others changed everything. Everyday stuff that used to be a breeze suddenly required help. And for a guy who built his brand on self-reliance, that was a brutal but necessary wake-up call. That vulnerability actually turned into a superpower, letting him connect with folks on a level he never could have reached when he was pretending to be invincible. By 2021, he was permanently in a wheelchair. But instead of letting bitterness eat him alive, he decided to flip the script and turn his tragedy into a lesson. The dude who used to turn heads with his pecs started drawing crowds with his heart and his story instead. But the wildest twist in this whole saga? WWE, the same massive corporation he'd burned bridges with back in the day, actually reached out and brought him into their wellness fold. Now, the former icon keeps it 100 with the new generation, warning them about addiction and life after the fame. Please hit that like button if you want to see more redemption stories like this one. You started seeing him pop up at conventions and WWE events again, not as the total package flexing for cameras, but as a living, breathing survivor. Everyone thought his legacy was sealed as the guy involved in the tragedy with Miss Elizabeth, but somehow he managed to write a new ending. When people ask how he's doing, he doesn't throw a pity party. He's genuinely grateful for the path he's on and the chance to stop others from making his mistakes. It's like the total package gimmick finally got peeled away to reveal the actual human being underneath, and that guy is way more interesting than the character ever was. Honestly, that personal evolution beats any gold belt he ever held. The industry he walked into back in 1985 is basically unrecognizable compared to the one using his life as a case study today. When the ultimate physical specimen becomes the face of the industry's worst habits, you gotta ask, did he fail the sport, or did the sport fail him? It's a debate that still splits the wrestling community down the middle. Some say he wasted his shot, while others argue he was pushed way past his limits just because promoters were obsessed with his look. The reality? It's probably a mix of both. He was a solid athlete thrown into the deep end before he could swim, but he still gave us iconic moments. His career is basically a timeline of the business itself. He started when local territories were king, rode the wave of national expansion, became a main eventer during the Monday Night Wars, and now acts as the voice of reason in a modern era that actually cares about health. Just like a character doing a face turn, the wrestling industry has gone through a massive personality change during his lifetime. Luger's story is so gripping because it mirrors what wrestling valued at the time. When he started, it was all about looking like a Greek god. Talent be damned. Bosses saw those muscles and saw dollar signs, pushing him to the moon alongside ring generals, even though he was still green. But as the 1990s rolled on and fans started caring more about in-ring skills, Luger started looking like a relic from the past. He was a superstar whose appearance wrote checks his wrestling ability couldn't always cash, right as the business shifted toward technical mastery. The game changed big time while he was center stage. We went from a Wild West with zero health regulations to a corporate environment with strict wellness policies, largely because of tragedies involving guys like him. The rehab support and drug testing we see today exist because the business learned some brutal lessons from the people who fell through the cracks. His impact on the locker room today is a double-edged sword. Some guys look at his old photos for gym motivation, but way more look at his struggles as a serious red flag. He's basically a walking warning sign, a guy who reached the top of the mountain only to realize the ground underneath him was crumbling. His career arc is wrestling in a nutshell, starting out all flash and spectacle, then eventually maturing into something with real substance. The most shocking part is where he ended up. The guy marketed as perfect now deals with major physical limits, yet he's found a purpose he never had when he was holding belts. In his recent sit-downs, he really opens up about that shift. He talks about facing your demons and chasing redemption, explaining that his journey from superstar to mentor shows how the sport itself has grown up. Ultimately, his fingerprint on WWE's current wellness approach is huge. Today's talent gets to hear the ugly truth about fame from someone who's seen the highest highs and the absolute lowest lows. It hits different because he's not judging them, he's speaking from painful experience, which makes the young guns actually listen. At the end of the day, his story proves that real success in this business isn't about championship titles or bicep measurements. For a long time, wrestling tried to tell us that greatness was just about looking cool, big entrances, and gold belts. Luger had all that in spades and still felt hollow. Watching the man behind the gimmick evolve into someone seeking real meaning offers maybe the biggest lesson of all, that finding peace inside yourself is worth way more than any trophy. Drop a comment below if you agree that mental health comes first. It seems like the industry learned that lesson right along with him. Modern policies finally treat these guys as humans first, athletes second, and characters last. That is a complete 180 from the world Luger broke into back in the day. His life traces the sport's move from vanity to sanity, setting the stage for how we'll remember his complicated legacy. And that brings us to the final chapter of Lex Luger's incredible roller coaster of a life. The man who was once the living definition of the total package has shown us that real power has nothing to do with gold belts or massive biceps. In recent sit-downs, Luger opened up about how he finally realized that life is really about being there for other people and being of service, a mission he dedicates himself to every single day. Honestly, that kind of mindset is worth way more than any championship strap he ever hoisted over his head. The superstar who used to spend hours obsessing over his reflection has completely shifted his focus outward, even putting together a documentary about his life just to help other folks steer clear of the mistakes he made. Going from a worshipped athlete to a humble servant, he uncovered the one lesson pro wrestling never taught him, which is that real happiness doesn't come from fans chanting your name, but from lifting others up. The Total Package's biggest win didn't happen inside the squared circle, but in finding his true calling when the lights went down. So please, smash that like button if you want to see more legends find their redemption. Catch you on the next one.